Ever get that feeling, that deep connection with someone during a conversation?
Like you're totally on the same wavelength.
Exactly. Turns out there's a ton of really cool science behind it. So we're doing a deep dive into how we connect as humans, how our brains and bodies, and even our guts can synchronize with others.
And sometimes in just 15 minutes.
So think of this deep dive as a journey into three incredible discoveries about connection.
Discoveries that you can actually use to create stronger bonds in your own life.
Let's start with neural synchronization. Ever heard of it?
Basically, it's this phenomenon where our brains start to align with whoever we're talking to.
Two brains becoming one.
Kind of.
Hmm.
Researchers at the Max Planck Institute use this technique called hyperscanning to measure brain activity when people are having conversations. They found that in less than 3 minutes, their neural patterns started mirroring each other.
Whoa, that's crazy. So it seems like our brains are wired to connect.
Yeah, on a much deeper level than we realize.
And this happens in the prefrontal cortex, right?
Right, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and empathy.
So it's like our brains are laying the foundation for connection before we've even processed the conversation.
And what's amazing is that it all happens unconsciously.
Yeah.
While you're thinking about what to say next, your brain is already building that bridge of understanding.
But it doesn't stop there, right? What about the chemistry of connection?
Our brains love a good chemical dance party. During deep connection, our bodies release this flood of feel-good hormones.
Like what?
Well, for example, oxytocin.
Often called the bonding hormone, right?
You got it. It surges by like 47%. It's like a wave of trust and closeness washing over you.
And at the same time, cortisol, the stress hormone, drops.
Plummets by like 39%.
So you feel more relaxed and at ease.
Exactly.
Dopamine is also involved, right?
Yeah, dopamine is all about pleasure and reward. And what's cool is that during meaningful conversation, dopamine levels actually synchronize between the two people.
So it's like their brains are experiencing pleasure together.
And that further strengthens the bond between them.
We've got oxytocin, cortisol, and dopamine working together. It sounds like the perfect recipe for deep connection. But I'm curious about the impact on learning and growth.
You're thinking about BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
That's a mouthful. What is it?
You can think of it as brain fertilizer.
Okay, I like that.
It helps with memory and learning, and it can increase by an incredible 56% during deep connection.
Wow, so every conversation is like a brain workout.
Exactly, helping it become stronger and more adaptable.
It's amazing to think that connecting with someone can have that kind of impact on our brains. But there's more to this connection puzzle than meets the eye, right? Let's talk about those almost invisible signals we send and receive. Microexpressions.
Oh yeah, microexpressions, they're super quick, facial expressions so fast you might not even realize you're seeing them. They only last for a fraction of a second, but they communicate so much about how we're truly feeling.
But our brains still pick up on them.
Oh yeah, in milliseconds.
Just how fast are we talking here?
You make something like 72 microexpressions every minute, and each one only lasts for 1/115th of a second.
That's mind-blowing. So what's the point of them?
They're critical for building trust and rapport. Our brains decode these subtle signals in less than 200 milliseconds.
That's faster than snapping your fingers.
So your brain forms an opinion about someone before you've even fully heard what they've said.
It's incredible to think we're having these whole conversations without even realizing it. So much is communicated beyond words. But we often assume connection is just a head thing. What about the role of our hearts and guts?
That's a great point. It's not just our heads. Our entire being is involved, especially our hearts and guts.
I've heard about this three-brain theory.
Right. This theory says that emotions live in 3 interconnected brains. The neural brain in our head, the cardiac brain in our heart, and the enteric brain in our gut.
So our hearts and guts have their own brains.
You got it. Each brain has its own job and contributes to connection.
Okay, so how does each brain contribute to connection? I mean, we all know about the neural brain up in our heads. It's like the command center for thinking, memory, and decision-making. What about the other two?
Well, the cardiac brain is a network of about 40,000 neurons, and it actually sends more signals to the neural brain than it receives.
Hold on, our hearts send more messages to our brains than the other way around?
Yep. Pretty cool, huh? And these signals from the heart are thought to be really important for empathy.
It's like we really do feel with our heart.
Exactly.
What about the enteric brain? What does it do?
So the enteric brain in your gut has a massive 500 million neurons, and it's responsible for making most of your body's serotonin.
I know serotonin's important for mood and sleep.
And even digestion.
It's like our gut is another brain. But how does this relate to connection?
It's deeply connected to our intuition, those gut feelings we get about people.
Like when you meet someone and instantly feel connected or not.
Exactly. That's your enteric brain at work, picking up on those subtle cues.
So we're processing information about people on multiple levels, consciously with our brains and unconsciously with our hearts and guts.
And for us to experience true connection, all three of these brains need to be working together.
I love that. Like an orchestra.
Exactly. For the music to sound good, every instrument needs to be in sync. And for us to connect effortlessly, all three brains need to be in harmony.
A symphony of connection. I love that.
Mm.
But how much do these nonverbal cues actually matter?
You've hit on a crucial point because we tend to focus so much on the words we say. Nonverbal communication is surprisingly important.
And there's research to back this up, right?
Researchers at Stanford discovered this thing called the 7-3-27 rule.
The 7-3-27 rule. What's that?
Basically, 73% of emotional connection happens through nonverbal communication.
Wow, 73%. That's most of it.
Only 27% comes from the words we speak.
That means microexpressions, body language, tone of voice, even those signals from our hearts and guts are the majority of how we connect.
That's right. And this study also found that it only takes 7 minutes for the synchronization to begin.
Just 7 minutes.
For our brains to start aligning on a deeper level.
I guess that's why small talk can feel so shallow.
It usually doesn't last long enough for that deeper alignment to happen.
So it's not just about being in the same room with someone, it's about giving our brains time to connect. But how do we move beyond small talk and create those deeper connections we crave?
Well, there are actually things you can do to get your brain and body ready for connection, even before you start talking.
What do you mean? Like kind of secret handshake?
Not quite. We call it neural priming.
Neural priming. Okay, I'm interested.
One of the best techniques is the 4-7-8 breathing exercise.
I think I've heard of that.
It's super simple. Just inhale deeply for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 7, and then exhale slowly for a count of 8.
Simple enough. But what's actually happening in our brains?
This type of breathing increases oxytocin levels by a lot, up to 89%, so you're getting a boost of that bonding hormone right away. It also activates your mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons. Aren't those the brain cells that fire when we see someone else doing something?
Exactly, and they also fire when we do that same thing ourselves. They're essential for empathy. They help us see things from another person's perspective.
So just by taking a few deep breaths, we can actually prepare our brains to connect.
That's right. You're setting the stage for a more understanding interaction.
What else can we do?
Another powerful technique is called micro-moment awareness. Basically, you pay attention to those fleeting moments of connection that we usually miss.
You mean those tiny micro-expressions and shifts in body language?
Yep. During a conversation, try focusing on 3-second windows of connection. Really tune in to the other person's nonverbal cues.
That sounds like it takes focus.
It does, but it gets easier with practice. Try making eye contact, matching their breathing and mirroring their movements. These small actions can build trust and rapport really quickly.
It's about slowing down, being present, and noticing those tiny details that build connection.
Exactly.
So what's the last technique?
The last tool focuses on something called heart-gut alignment.
Heart-gut alignment. What's that all about?
After you have a conversation with someone, take a moment to think about how it felt, instead of just focusing on what was said.
Ah, so we're tapping into those other two brains.
You got it. The cardiac brain and the enteric brain. By focusing on how something felt, you strengthen the emotional memory of that connection.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing. We've learned so much about how our brains and bodies connect with others.
And the coolest thing is that every interaction, every conversation shapes our brains. It's not just about exchanging ideas. We're actually changing each other's physiology with every connection we make.
That's amazing. We're literally all connected.
We have so much power to intentionally create the kind of relationships we want.
This has been an awesome deep dive into the science of connection.
Join us next time for part 2, where we go even deeper.
We'll be exploring even more mind-blowing research that will change how you think about relationships.
See you then.
See ya. Welcome back to our deep dive into human connection. We've been exploring how our brains, bodies, and even our guts can sync up.
During those special moments of deep connection.
But there's so much more to uncover. In this part, we're diving into some seriously mind-bending territory.
Get ready to shift your perspective. We're talking about mirror neurons, those tiny brain cells that act like bridges connecting us to each other.
Mirror neurons. I've heard the term, but I could use a refresher on how they work.
Okay, so imagine you're watching someone reach for a cup of coffee. As they reach, your mirror neurons fire as if you were the one reaching.
Whoa, so it's like my brain is simulating their experience.
Exactly, it lets you understand their actions and even their intentions.
Wow. What does this tell us about connection?
Well, mirror neurons are thought to be super important for empathy and for social learning and even for how we develop language.
Like a built-in empathy engine.
Exactly, allowing us to step into someone else's shoes and feel what they're feeling.
So we really do have this ability to connect with others on a deep level. If these mirror neurons are so important for empathy, could they hold the key to even deeper levels of understanding and compassion?
Now, that is a fascinating question, and researchers are definitely exploring it. The implications are huge. Imagine if we could activate our mirror neurons to boost empathy and build stronger connections.
That would be incredible. A more compassionate and understanding world. Do you think we could actually train our brains to be more empathetic?
The exciting thing is that there's evidence we can. Things like mindfulness meditation and active listening have actually been shown to increase mirror neuron activity.
So by being more present and attentive in our interactions, we can strengthen those connections in our brains. It's empowering to know we're not just stuck with our biology. We can actually work towards creating the connections we want.
We're not just passive recipients of connection. We are active creators.
This is truly groundbreaking stuff. Connection isn't just an idea, it's a real phenomenon happening in our brains and bodies. Speaking of the body, I know there's a link between connection and health.
Absolutely. Connection isn't just good for our souls, it's good for our bodies too. There's more and more research showing that people with strong connections tend to be healthier.
Wait, so having strong connections can actually make us healthier?
It's true.
What kind of research are we talking about here?
Studies have found that people with strong social networks have lower rates of heart disease, stroke, depression, and even dementia.
So that's like a built-in support system.
Exactly. It helps us deal with life's challenges and come out stronger.
That's amazing. Nurturing those meaningful connections isn't just good for our mental health. It's good for our physical health and how long we live. It's like an investment in our well-being.
You got it.
So how do we nurture these connections? How do we make sure we're getting all the benefits? What can we actually do?
It all starts with being intentional about the relationships we build. Make time for the people who are important to you.
In our crazy busy world, it's so easy to let those connections slip away.
It's true, but it's worth the effort.
So put down the phone, turn off the TV, and just be present with the people you care about.
Those simple changes can make a world of difference. And it's not just about physically paying attention, it's about being curious and open, really trying to understand the other person.
So it's not just about the amount of time we spend together, but about the quality of that time.
Right, it's about choosing to connect deeply with a few people, rather than superficially with many.
But how do we find the time for those deeper connections?
It is a balancing act, but even small moments of genuine connection can have a big impact. Have you ever had a short conversation that left you feeling deeply connected?
All the time.
It's not always about the length of time, it's about the quality of the interaction.
So we need to be mindful of how we're interacting, really tuning into the other person and being present in that moment.
Connection thrives on presence, authenticity, and vulnerability. It's about letting your guard down and being yourself.
Letting people see our true selves, imperfections and all.
Exactly.
Creates that safe space where we can share our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together. We don't have to pretend to have it all figured out.
And that is so liberating when we let go of the need to be perfect. We open ourselves up to those real, authentic connections.
It's beautiful.
So we've got intentional attention, which helps us really see and understand others, and vulnerability, which lets us be seen and understood in return. What else should we keep in mind as we try to build connections?
Remember that connection is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. It takes work and attention.
Like tending a garden.
Exactly. You need to water those seeds of connection, weed out negativity, and create the right environment for growth.
That's such a great analogy. So as we practice intentional attention and vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
and we nurture those connections, we start to see a ripple effect.
Our connections deepen, relationships flourish, and we create a more loving world.
This has been an incredible journey so far. We've explored how connection works in our brains and bodies.
And how powerful it can be for our health and well-being.
But we're not done yet.
In Part 3, we'll dive into some practical strategies for using these insights to build deeper connections in your own life.
So get ready to put this knowledge into action and create those meaningful relationships you've been craving.
See you in Part 3.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts exploring the incredible science of human connection, from how our brains synchronize to the role of our hearts and guts in building those bonds. But now it's time to put all this knowledge into action, to transform those insights into real-world strategies for deeper connections.
You're right, it's time to go from understanding to actually applying what we've learned. We now know that connection isn't some mysterious force, it's something we actively create through our choices and actions.
So let's get strategic. We've talked about nonverbal communication, mirror neurons, and those three brains. The neural, cardiac, and enteric all working together to build connection. But how do we actually use all this in our daily lives?
It might seem complicated, but it can be surprisingly simple. One powerful technique is called intentional attunement.
Intentional attunement, what's that?
It's about choosing to focus all your attention on the other person, really seeing them, hearing them, and feeling them.
It sounds like mindfulness, bringing your full presence to the interaction.
Exactly. You let go of distractions, quiet your mind, and tune into the other person. Their words, body language, even their energy. It's about making them feel truly seen and heard.
So things like putting down our phones, closing our laptops, making eye contact.
Those simple things can make a huge difference, and it's not just about physically paying attention. It's about cultivating a genuine curiosity, a real desire to understand the other person's experience.
Replacing judgment with empathy. Listening to understand, not just to respond.
You got it. When you practice intentional attunement, you become more aware of those subtle cues, the microexpressions, the tone of voice, the unspoken emotions.
It's like you're learning to speak the language of connection. You can read between the lines and understand the deeper meaning.
And here's the best part. As you understand the other person better, your mirror neurons start firing, creating a feeling of shared experience and strengthening those feelings of empathy.
So all these elements work together to create that sense of deep connection. Intentional attunement is key. But what else can we do?
Another powerful practice is vulnerability sharing.
Vulnerability sharing. You mean opening up to others?
Exactly. It's about letting people see your authentic self, your imperfections, fears, hopes, and dreams.
Being vulnerable can be scary, but it's essential for building trust and intimacy.
Absolutely. When you're vulnerable, you give others permission to do the same. You create a space of mutual understanding and acceptance.
Where it's okay to not be perfect.
Exactly.
We're all in this together, and we don't have to pretend to have it all figured out.
And that can be so freeing.
So we have intentional attunement, which helps us understand others, and vulnerability sharing, which helps others understand us. What else should we remember?
Connection is not a one-time event. It's a process, and it needs constant nurturing and attention.
It's like tending a garden.
Exactly. You have to keep watering those seeds of connection, weeding out negativity, and creating a space for growth.
I love that analogy.
So when we practice intentional attunement and vulnerability, and we nurture those connections, we start to create a ripple effect. Deeper connections, stronger relationships, a more loving world.
This has been such an incredible journey. We've learned that connection is a real, tangible thing happening in our brains, bodies, and energy fields.
It's not something that just happens to us. We create it through our choices and actions.
We've explored so much in this deep dive. Neural synchronization, mirror neurons, nonverbal communication, and the impact of connection on our well-being.
We've learned that vulnerability is the key to intimacy. That intentional attunement allows us to truly see and understand others, and that every interaction we have can change our brains and our relationships.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of awe at the power of human connection.
It's truly amazing, and by understanding and harnessing this power, we can create a more compassionate, understanding, and connected world.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing journey. We hope you've learned something new about connection, and that you have some new tools to build deeper, more meaningful relationships.
And remember, connection is not just a desire, it's our birthright. It's a part of who we are, and it's waiting to be awakened.
So go out there and connect. Embrace vulnerability, be present, and remember, the world is waiting for your unique expression of love and connection.